When our Constitution was created, it was one of a kind in the world. It truly, truly was. And it paved the way for generations of success that we get to enjoy today. One reason that more than 1 million university level students come to the US each year is that we have the world's top universities. This influx of brain power adds 55 billion annually to the US economy, and equally important, adds to the foundation for the innovations that we rely on as a country to advance generation after generation. We are celebrating the 250th anniversary in the US. So let's jump in. Let's have some fun. Let's talk about how great America is. One of my favorite topics in the world, as a matter of fact. So in 2026, the United States of America, here with all of us here, we got to mark our 250th anniversary. So it's a milestone that invites us to look past the surface level noise of our daily newsfeed and examine the structural reality of what is historically referred to as the Great Experiment, aka the United States. We are the Great Experiment. And dare I say, I believe we're the most successful political experiment in human history. Bold statement, but we're about to back it up with some really cool stuff here. When the founders declared independence in 1776, they broke away from the strict rule of a monarch and launched a high-stakes bet, gambling that a sprawling, diverse, and self-governing republic could survive without a king at that time. Pretty scandalous idea. Nor a state religion, nor a shared bloodline. All of these things very much breaking away from tradition and making our founding fathers a pretty impressive group of individuals. The path to 250 years has not always been easy. Our great nation has endured deep conflicts along the way, as we know, but we've managed to endure as a united republic and to make some massive positive impacts on the world and humanity along the way. Today, our goal as a Saint team, bringing this American exceptionalism, this amazing topic, our goal today is to step away from the surface level look at the United States. Instead, we're going to look at the cold, hard data, the economic, the legal, and the historical facts to evaluate where America stands today. We will examine why this republic, why our republic remains the world's primary engine of innovation, economic output, and global security, and how our current internal frictions today that we're seeing compare to the deep historical currents of our past. But to understand our present, we've got to start with the raw human material, the humans behind it that built this system, our foundational relationship with people that are leaving one country and going to a new world for a better life. So today we're going to cover a realistic, data-driven assessment of America's position, global impact, and continuing democratic journey in our semi-quincentennial. I love that word. Great word. Our semi-quincentennial year. Today we're going to tell you about the Great Experiment. How are we doing at 250 years? We're going to talk about the United States history, 1776 to 2026. We're going to talk about how the U.S. has maintained its dominance through that period of time. But before we get too far, in case we haven't gotten to meet directly yet, I want to introduce myself and just take a second here. My name is Nic DeAngelo. I am honored to be president of Saint Investment Group and work with an amazing team here at Saint day in and day out. I get to have a lot of fun and be a recognized thought leader in the investment, real estate, et cetera, economic space. We dig in a lot on economics. So this includes podcasts. This includes webinars like these. This includes going on stages across the country. And we even released a book, which was a bestseller in 3 categories this year. So if you haven't gotten to check out our book, Economics Over Politics, highly, highly, highly recommended. Lots of amazing reviews. And it's something that you guys would probably really enjoy and get a lot out of if you like presentations like we're about to dive into here. What I'm most proud of is the performance of our team for investors, without a doubt. We currently have over 600 mortgage notes in over 29 states and growing, over 200 million in assets under management. We pay a return we're very proud of in the market, And what I'm most proud of on this slide is that we've never missed a distribution to our investors, and that's been for over a decade. We like to say always on time, every time. And I always, at this moment, like to take a second and encourage you guys to check out our reviews. I am a huge fan of Saint. I think we're the best company in the world. I think we're the best investment group in the world. But you guys should get some third-party opinions, and those can be found online, 2 places, Trustpilot and Google. We have dozens of reviews actually from people that have worked with us, that have their experiences shared there. So I encourage you guys to take a look if you have interest in learning about what we're doing and how we're investing at Saint and what that experience looks like. And before we get too far, I want to take a moment and introduce you guys. You might have already talked to him. I mean, he's a little local celebrity in the Saint level, but I want to introduce you guys to Mr. Tom Furlong, our Director of Investor Success. If you guys haven't talked to Tom, he is seasoned in this industry. He's worked with hundreds and hundreds of investors, helped them invest hundreds of millions of dollars into all kinds of investment offerings. So he's seen a lot across the board. But Tom, can you jump in, tell everyone what you do with Saint, and let them know how you can help them out? Oh, you're muted, Tom. Get your mute on. Is it bugging over there? Oh, shoot. I could hype up Tom all day.
Oh, no.
Oh, Ange, you gotta, here, let's see.
I'm gonna unmute him. But
Thanks, Ange.
There we go.
I appreciate that.
There we go.
Yeah, and the same way, actually, if you guys want to unmute, you can send a message just in the chat. It'll just have to be one of us here, either Angie or Nick, to unmute. But thanks, Nick, here for the introduction. And to introduce myself, yep, I'm the Investor Success Pro. I know a lot of us have connected already, so really great to meet those that I have. But I haven't met everyone here. So if we haven't yet connected, our income fund, as Nick was saying, the best thing in the entire world. If you are looking at your roadmap of investments, if you're looking at fixed income options, that's exactly what we're here to talk about. I've raised, Nick, as you mentioned, now it's now 220 million between retail investors, family offices, some JV funds. So if I can't answer the question for you, I can definitely find someone that can answer the question for you. And we're happy to make sure that we put you in contact with the right people. Hopefully it's us. I'll drop my contact information just in the chat right here. So during this call, if you have any questions, but you don't want to come on in front of everyone on Zoom, you don't want to type it in the chat, you can just message me directly. And if you've decided to invest into the income fund at any time during this call, you can just call me directly. I'll be working behind the scenes here. My whole role is to be a resource for you.
Amazing. Thank you, Tom. And you have zero problems muting and unmuting yourself now. I fixed it. Okay.
That was my next question, is just making sure that everyone can unmute along the way. Thank you, Ange. Appreciate that. But as Tom said, guys, he's an amazing resource. He's seen all kinds of different portfolios, different strategies, different situations. So if you have questions, you want to learn more about the Saint Income Fund, you have Tom's information in the chat. You can click on a link and book a time to talk with him and dive in a little deeper on what we're doing here at Saint. Or if you have questions along the way, just ping him. He's a great resource. I love talking with Tom. He's fun just to, to talk to, bounce things off of, and compare notes as well. So with that said, thank you, Tom. Tom's a resource, and let's kick things off. So here is a little outline for today. First, we will start with a legal disclaimer and keep the attorneys happy. Then we're jumping into American exceptionalism. I can't wait for this topic. There's so much good information here. We'll wrap up with a little bit of housekeeping, and then we have live Q&A at the end. This is consistently something that people rate as one of the highest advantages and benefits to webinars. So whether that's talking about the content that we're going through, whether the investment opportunity, economics, investment strategy, we're here to talk. We're here to chat. We're here to build a community and have some good conversation. So live Q&A at the end. And before we get too far, I encourage you guys to read a word from our legal team. But here are the highlights. Not investment advice that we're going through today. This is for educational purposes only. All investments carry risk. Past performance does not ensure future results. And then a couple that I just added, I'm going to be talking about a lot of numbers throughout today. So I encourage you guys to research these numbers and understand these numbers. And then last but not least, Saint owns all the rights to this material. So we do ask that you guys don't reproduce or reuse anything that we go through here today. And we have a monthly book club. It's something that we're reading on the Saint team, something that we have the opportunity we give our whole team the opportunity to buy and really get synced up on whatever that topic is that we're diving into, as well as just have some good conversations and some good learning. We want to enjoy this with you as well. But not only that, we want to give you this book away for free. Okay. So I'll tell you in a second how you can earn this book, but let me tell you a little bit about this book. This month's book featured is America at 250. It's a collection of stories that have built America and a vision of the future that we can achieve as a country if we move through the roadblocks that we're seeing today. What does it mean to belong to a nation, to a shared story, to something larger than ourselves, especially at a time when everything feels fragmented, which if you're watching the news, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So this book covers all of the above, and you can get this book now. If you got to jump early and you're not able to really enjoy the full webinar today, you can scan this code. You can go buy it on Amazon. But what I'd really like to do is give you this book away for free. So if you want to earn this book for free and you want us to send you a gift, here's what we can do. If you engage throughout this presentation, throughout this webinar, we're going to send you a book. The top engagers here are getting a book. You can leave comments in the chat, questions in the chat, responding to polls, and then also engaging in Q&A at the end. All amazing ways to engage and to get a book for free if you're a top engager with us today. So with that said, let's kick things off and let's have some fun. And let's talk about a topic really close to my heart, American exceptionalism. So, and we just had a poll pop up here too as well. So I encourage you guys to enter this poll. So, how would you describe your current perspective of the United States position on the global stage? Concerned, selectively optimistic, bullish, or unsure? I'll give you guys a second to dive in. Oh, so many good responses. Lots of votes coming in. I love it. I love it. Ooh, a couple fighting for the top spot. Okay, so let's go through the results. A, concerned. B, selectively optimistic. C, bullish. And D, unsure. The winner is bullish. The winner is bullish with 43% of votes, followed by selectively optimistic. I love this. I love this. I'm not going to give you guys yet my opinion on this, but I have a feeling that as we go through slides that you'll see exactly where we land on the Saint team. But this is a great poll here. So number one, bullish. Number two, selectively optimistic. Man, I love the patriotism today. I love that. Let's kick things off. So we often hear the phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This is a way to illustrate the achievements of people who started with little or nothing. Truthfully, from an economic standpoint, the early American immigrant experience was a massive self-selection filter. This is an important term, self-selection filter. So what does that mean? That means that those that chose to come to America, both in the past and really today, are already bootstrap mentality individuals. The individuals who packed their lives back then into cargo ships to cross the Atlantic or the Pacific did not represent the comfortable or the risk averse. They were, by definition, the most ambitious, risk tolerant, and resilient segments of their home countries. They entered a system that offered zero safety nets, but unprecedented freedoms and opportunity. If you wanted to survive at that time, you had to innovate, you had to adapt, and you had to build immediately. These are the roots of America, period. These traits made our country from day one. So when you read the Declaration of Independence or you see the immense boldness of the American persona, this is because that's who we are at our very core. That's who we were at the very core at the beginning as well. This historic self-reliance is not a dead relic, by the way. It is the active fuel of our modern economy also. And guess what? The data proves it. Immigrants are 80% more likely to start a business in the United States than native-born citizens. And 44.8% of the companies on the Fortune 500 list today were founded either by an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. This is a staggering metric when you think about it as a part of the whole. But that's who we are as a country. We attract the hard workers, the builders, the innovators from an immigration standpoint. And for Americans in the US for generations, we have that bootstrap mentality in the fabric of who we are. The economic vitality of the United States has never been static. It is constantly refreshed by a continuous inflow of global talent possessing that same original self-selecting drive. And it's multiplied by the work ethic and ingenuity of Americans who have been raised with that American mentality from day one. The foundation that enabled, and still does, this self-reliant philosophy to succeed is the brilliance of our constitutional design, again, from day one. When our Constitution was created, it was one of a kind in the world, guys. It truly, truly was. And it paved the way for generations of success that we get to enjoy today. One reason that more than 1 million university level students come to the US each year is that we have the world's top universities. This influx of brain power adds $55 billion annually to the US economy, and equally important, adds to the foundation for the innovations that we rely on as a country to advance generation after generation. Before we talk about what makes America great at this advanced stage, let's take a look at the principles of government that enable our achievements day in and day out. The legal blueprint, liberty by design. Powerful. I love that phrasing. Unlike European constitutions that focus on positive rights, aka what the government must provide to citizens, things like healthcare or housing, the US Constitution focuses primarily on negative rights, aka individual immunities. These are things like what the government cannot do to the citizen. This guarantees a high level of individual agency and prevents rapid centralized overreach by the government. You can think of many of the European constitutions having minimums that they have to adhere to, the minimum amount they must do for their citizens. In the US, however, the focus is on the maximum reach that the government can have. The goal was to instill boundaries and limitations on the government and let the citizens have the freedom to use their skills to flourish and build their lives in the best way that they could with those freedoms. The reality is our founders were very pragmatic. They were highly skeptical legal architects when they started building our Constitution and rights. They studied the collapse of the Roman Empire. They studied the excesses of European monarchies. Frankly, they lived the excesses of European monarchies. And they designed a legal blueprint engineered specifically to resist human corruption. This is why things like the Epstein files are so enraging to Americans specifically, because when we see massive corruption, it means the overreach of government, and that is against the core of Americanism. So how did our founders change the entire constitutional landscape of the entire world? Well, first they drafted the US Constitution by dividing federal power into 3 competing branches and balancing those against power of individual states. They created a system of mutually shared power. The goal was a strong system of checks and balances, all parts of government keeping the other pieces in check. It was designed to make rapid, radical, centralized overreach extremely difficult. It is the oldest, this is important, it is the oldest active written constitution in the world today. And its structural separation of powers has been adapted or copied by by over 100 countries globally. So when our European cousins say how young America is, you can remind them that our Constitution is actually the oldest in the world and even older than theirs. Second, our founding fathers added the Bill of Rights. What makes this document historically unique is its emphasis on individual immunities, which are something called negative rights. We kind of touched on this a second ago. Rather than listing what the state is obligated to provide for you or us, Our Bill of Rights dictates what the state is legally prohibited from doing to you. Our Bill of Rights Our Bill of Rights establishes a hard shield of protection around free speech, religious assembly, and private property. And these examples are not small potatoes. They were chosen specifically because at the time of our founding as a nation, these are the freedoms that had been trampled on by countless other governments throughout the world. And finally, the founding fathers developed the mechanism of judicial review. This was popularized by Marbury versus Madison. This empowered an independent judiciary to nullify laws that violated the Constitution. Together, these three pillars created a stable, predictable legal framework that protected both human liberty and long-term capital investments. So, how does this rigid legal framework hold up when applied to a highly diverse, multicultural population? Let's look at the data on integration. A question frequently raised in political science today is whether America is better at multiculturalism than other nations. To answer this objectively, we have to contrast the American melting pot idea with the European mosaic idea or parallel society models. Most European nations have historically defined their national identity through blood, soil, and ancestral lineage. In contrast, American identity is built entirely around a shared creed, in allegiance to the principles of the Constitution. And because of this, the pathway to becoming fully American is accessible to outsiders that want to become American. The data reflects this structural difference. Comparative studies by the OECD show that immigrant families in the United States acquire English language proficiency and achieve upward economic mobility significantly faster than immigrants in European countries. Unlike systems that encourage parallel, isolated communities, the American model incentivizes rapid economic and social integration while preserving cultural heritage. It turns diversity into a compounding economic advantage rather than a source of permanent social friction. This civic integration creates a deep social reserve. When external crises strike, this diverse population displays a remarkable, proven capacity to unite as Americans. We see this in times of crisis in the US over and over again. No matter how much political tension we see at different stages, Americans band together in times of crisis with the shared American identity at the core of that unity. Now, let's talk resilience and unity in times of crisis specifically. Critics can often point out that America is loud, we're divided, and we're slow to act in peaceful times. But history reveals a strange paradox. The American system transforms friction into sheer mass mobilization faster than any country on earth, bar none. Look at the First World War. We'll start there. In 1916, the United States maintained a domestic standing military smaller than Portugal's. Yet within 18 months of entering World War I, the selective service system and an unparalleled industrial pivot placed over 2 million trained, supplied, and fed American soldiers on the Western Front. This is a staggering logistical feat executed by a fiercely individualistic public that suddenly operated as a single unit with a single goal and a single identity. 20 years later, we have the attack on Pearl Harbor. This triggered an even more absolute transformation in the United States. The standard narrative celebrates the obvious, undeniable courage of the troops, for sure, and fully owed there. But the data highlights also an industrial miracle as well. By 1943, American factories were outproducing the entirety of the Axis powers combined. Women who had never stepped foot on a factory floor reworked the automotive lines of Detroit to build B-24 Liberator bombers at a peak speed of 1 aircraft every single hour. This wasn't just a response to a government mandate. It was a voluntary, ground-up alignment of private capital, labor unions, and individual citizens who were also subject to the discomfort of things like strict rubber, gas, and meat rationing along the way. This was a feat of incredible American achievement. And when the stuff hits the fan, Americans unite and we overcome. We saw that exact same cultural pivot on September 11th, 2001. In the hours following the terrorist attack, the immediate response wasn't military. It was an organic wave of civic action, the people banding together. When Lower Manhattan was cut off, a spontaneous flotilla of civilian tugboats, ferries, and fishing vessels evacuated over 500,000 stranded individuals in less than 9 hours. To this day, it remains the largest maritime evacuation in human history, even larger than the military rescue at Dunkirk. In the weeks that followed, charitable contributions topped 2.8 billion, corporate competitors pooled resources, and a fractured political landscape passed unified defense measures almost unanimously. In the year following 9/11, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that approximately 59 million Americans, more than 1 in 4 adults at the time, volunteered for a civic or charitable organization. Unbelievable. Driven by a widespread urge to support neighbors, first responders, and national relief efforts, the overall U.S. adult volunteer rate hit a historic peak of 28.8% over the next 3 years. Our lived experiences as a nation teach us that while America may drift apart during times of safety, and we see plenty of that even today, our default response to existential danger is a powerful movement by Americans to unite together. Securing global peace and trade. So, we know that the U.S. had key roles in the world wars that turned the tide and shaped the future. How else has the U.S. shaped the world that we live in today in the post-World War II world? Well, in 1945, the United States stood as the only major industrial power largely untouched by the domestic combat. We controlled half of the entire world's manufacturing capacity. I wish we'd get back there today. I'm rooting for that. A traditional empire at that time would have used this asymmetric advantage to permanently conquer its rivals. If there's anything we've learned from history, it's that someone in this position would have taken advantage of it. Traditional empires would have expanded borders to the fullest degree possible in a world that was on its last leg. But America, we did the exact opposite, and I'm actually pretty damn proud of that. Through the Marshall Plan, the U.S. exported over $13 billion in direct aid, roughly $170 billion in today's dollars, to rebuild not just our allies, but also our defeated enemies, including Germany and Japan. The strategic objective was clear: create a stable, prosperous, and interconnected global market. One thought was that if the world was interconnected with trade, it would be less interested in conflict, as conflict would cripple the economy of any country cut off from that global trade network. That type of foresight is very hard to imagine any country taking today to take such an action. Where we see the world economic systems today fracturing into more regional networks and reducing dependence on one another, that idea stands firm. The U.S. led globalized economic systems and birthed the modern era of globalization. Hard stop. But by establishing and funding the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which later became the World Trade Organization, the United States essentially underwrote a system where any nation, no matter how small, could safely trade its goods across the globe. This was revolutionary at the time, and when the world had a long-established history of privacy and exclusive trade networks that were previous to this. But free trade requires a guarantor. Someone has to enforce it. That guarantor is, today, and always has been, the United States Navy. For the last 80 years, the U.S. Navy has secured the global maritime waters. Our carrier strike groups protect critical global choke points, things like Strait of Malacca, Suez Canal, right? Things like that. And we protect them from piracy, from state aggression, and illegal blockades that block trade globally. Without the U.S. taxpayer funding this global security blanket, the shipping lanes that deliver consumer electronics from Asia to Europe, or energy supplies from the Middle East to the West, these things would collapse into regional spheres of influence. The peace and explosive wealth accumulation experienced by developing nations over the last century was systematically paved by American military primacy. I'm going to be honest here. We're still waiting for our Christmas basket and a thank you card from a lot of these countries, but I still remain hopeful that they'll send those for what we did for global trade for their countries. By funding a defense budget that exceeds the next 10 countries combined, American taxpayers create the security of the Western Hemisphere, of Europe, and the Indo-Pacific. The US maintains over 800 foreign military bases across the globe. This military shield protects democratic sovereign nations from expansionist neighbors while simultaneously securing the physical infrastructure of the internet through undersea cable defense and outer space satellite tracking. Without the stabilizer of American military and economic power, the global system would quickly turn and fracture into volatile, highly dangerous regional conflicts. In my own experience, here's a fun story. I was visiting some family in Italy a handful of years ago. Or actually a good chunk of time ago. Italians are generally very friendly to Americans. I want to be clear on that. But at the same time, they were very outspoken at the time against the US war in Iraq. My cab driver was going on and on about how bad the US military was and that we were expansionist and globalist, et cetera, et cetera. And at one point, I kind of hit a wall and I'd had enough. So I said, okay, man, well, listen, what would happen if Italy was attacked by another country? All right. If you have this opinion of the US military, what would you do if you were attacked by another country? Without hesitation, the cab driver said immediately, well, we would call the US for help. So think about that. Even some of the most outspoken countries against US military dominance, they know that their existence as a nation is because they can call the big bad US for help when war breaks out and things hit the fan. I love this quote. As a rising tide lifts all boats. A rising tide lifts all boats. A rising tide lifts all boats. So as a rising tide lifts all boats, the US has also gained tremendously from the world economic order that we created and that we continue to protect. While we have paid and earned that position in the world, it's still something we get a deep advantage from. To understand America's true footprint in the 21st century, consider this single extraordinary statistic. The United States contains only 4% of the world's population, yet we generate more than 26% of total global economic output and about 65% of the value of the world's investable public stocks. More than half of the world's 100 most valuable publicly traded companies are American. This far surpasses any other country in the world. Most Americans also have a direct stake. 62% of Americans own stocks, compared with a third or less in most other developed countries. This immense economic capacity is what funds the foundational framework of modern globalism. By safeguarding global security, the US is providing other nations with physical and economic security in their own countries. There's a lot of talk around the extraordinary privilege that the US holds as the issuer of the global reserve currency. However, we have always used that privilege to protect international commerce with confidence. And yes, when we have that kind of weight and influence, we also get the fruits and benefits of that because we've paid for it and we've earned it. So how has the US built such a huge economic advantage? I'll let you guys read this screen. I'm going to sneak a sip of water. Let's dive in and let's talk about the pillars of American exceptionalism. What areas do we far and wide excel at beyond our competition in the economic realm? We have achieved our position of global economic dominance by sustained commitment to excellence and fearless and aggressive innovation. When we look at where the world's most disruptive innovations originate, the data consistently points back to American soil. And this is not due to luck. It is due to a highly deliberate combination of industrial engineering, scientific funding, and capital. In the industrial sectors, the US is a historical leader. From Henry Ford's creation of the moving assembly line all the way to the development of the Silicon transistor at Bell Labs, the United States pioneered modular, high-volume, high-value manufacturing. We established the templates of modern consumer electronics and computing. Let's also consider biomedical research. The United States accounts for over 40% of all global biopharmaceutical research and development spending. From the historic eradication of polio to the rapid creation of modern vaccines, American laboratories consistently lead the globe in therapeutics, oncology, genetic engineering, and many other areas. Cutting-edge genetic medicine, which is still in its infancy, keeps producing therapy options for illnesses that were previously untreatable, including things like sickle cell disease and muscular dystrophy. And finally, look at our financial capital and the wealth that it has created. The United States invented the modern venture capital model, coupled with the immense liquidity of the stock market and even NASDAQ as an example. Our financial system provides a concentration of risk-tolerant capital unmatched anywhere in the world. This unique risk-embracing framework allows bold ideas to scale from a garage to a global enterprise at blinding speed. We see this over and over again. Microsoft, Apple, etc. Hundreds of examples in U.S. history. The U.S. also leads the world in venture capital, with more than $450 billion available to American startups. Staggering statistic. Number 2 in the world is China, with only $41 billion. That makes it far easier for U.S. entrepreneurs to access financing to start a business and pursue their dreams. And the U.S. has over 10x the available venture capital to the second place country of China. The net impact of these engines is a level of economic productivity that defies standard geographic and population scales. So let's take a look at manufacturing. One of my favorite segments, something I'm always tracking in the economic data in the U.S. The U.S. became the world's leader in manufacturing output in 1890. Okay, so we've had a high degree of manufacturing output for many years. We've also held the same top spot until China took that in 2010. While China overtook the United States in gross manufacturing in 2010 to become the world's largest producer, the type of manufacturing in both nations has changed significantly. Rather than a simple story of deindustrialization like you see in many parts of the world, the U.S. manufacturing sector has pivoted heavily towards high value add, capital intensive, and research driven production. Meanwhile, China has evolved into from the world's factory of low cost goods into a manufacturing juggernaut characterized by unmatched scale, complete supply chain density, and hardware assembly. So really, between the U.S. and China, we've split by what we focus on. China has their niche and the U.S. has our niche. The U.S. has a clear advantage in value added per worker, the use of proprietary intellectual property, capital investment, and advanced automation. China's advantage is based on unmatched scale, supply chain density, and speed of updates in their supply chain. In short, the U.S. excels in design, research and development, advanced production and integration, while China wins at component manufacturing and high volume assembly. All right. Let's take a minute and just brag on America. Let's talk about some really fun, impressive stats. You can see this chart. This is the number of Nobel Peace Prizes. You can see that there's the US crushing everybody. And let's jump into the data here because I'm really proud of it. Looking at the Nobel Prizes given in scientific areas is a great highlight of our accomplishments. Since World War II, the United States has secured over 50% of all Nobel Prizes in physiology and medicine, physics and chemistry. While often viewed as an academic prestige, this scientific achievement is a foundational pillar of U.S. economic, technological, and geopolitical dominance. Out of the 600 Nobel laureates in scientific disciplines globally, more than 350 were US-based at the time of their award. Prior to World War II, so we'll wind back the clock a little bit. Prior to World War II, Germany and the UK led scientific research. Post-1945, the combination of federal R&D funding and private university endowments shifted the epicenter of global scientific discovery permanently to the United States. And of course, not all these Nobel Prize recipients were born in the US. Over 30% of US Nobel laureates were born outside of the United States. Very interesting. So let's talk a couple of effects here. One is the magnet effect, right? This is also called brain drain, but the magnet effect is a little more respectful of other countries. Top minds from Europe, Asia, and Latin America moved to the US because of unparalleled university funding, academic freedom, and high-tech lab infrastructure. Once in the US, these researchers build laboratories, train generations of PhDs, and incubate startups, continually renewing the nation's human capital advantage. These facts reinforce the importance of US maintaining our appeal as the brightest minds of other nations come over. These brilliant thinkers are not just devoted to academics. they also form the foundation of huge industries here in the US. In biotechnology and pharma, discoveries like biorecumbent DNA, monoclonal antibodies, and mRNA vaccine technologies directly spawned the US-dominated global biotech and pharmaceutical industries. We also have information technology and computing, Nobel-winning foundational physics research, things like the invention of the transistor at Bell Labs, things like integrated circuits, etc. These laid the ground for Silicon Valley and the entire modern digital economy that we enjoy in the US. Some of the reason for this is the US's unique bridge between academics and commerce. In 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act allowed universities and researchers to retain patent rights to federally funded research. This single legislative act created the modern university technology transfer model that we see today. There's also a close linkage to venture capital, that investment capital that's required to take these new technologies to the moon and utilize them. US Nobel-winning labs are directly linked to this investment capital. If we want to make innovations, we have to have the funding to do so. Scientists at institutions like MIT, Stanford, and Harvard routinely launch VC-backed companies out of their foundational research. In addition, the US supremacy in strategic defense and national security both contribute and benefit from our research and technology prowess. Advanced military capabilities, from radar to GPS to stealth technology to atomic energy, et cetera, these all come from basic scientific breakthroughs pioneered in US laboratories. And this all feeds into that the US also maintains geopolitical leverage. Controlling basic scientific IP gives the US regulatory and export control leverage over global supply chains. America's Nobel lead is not an accident of nature. It's the natural outcome of an open system that combines massive R&D funding, legal protection for intellectual property, immigrant talent, and risk-embracing venture capital. It proves that America remains the world's primary engine for pushing forward the frontiers of human knowledge. This is a good chart too. I love this chart. So how does the brilliance and innovation translate into output for Americans? One great metric, something that we look at regularly here at Saint, is per capita GDP. Let's look at the raw productivity numbers. It's easy for a small country with a tiny population, something like Luxembourg or Singapore, for instance, it's easy for them to maintain a high GDP per capita. It's also easy for a massive nation with over 1 billion people, something like China or India, to have a high nominal GDP, while its citizens might be relatively poor on average. What makes the US a complete economic anomaly in the world today is our ability to combine this immense scale with high income productivity as well. As you can see on the chart, based on the latest IMF economic data, the average GDP per capita in the United States stands at an extraordinary $94,400. That is more than double the average of the European Union, which is at $44,200. It's also 6 times more than the output of China, which is currently at $14,700, and over 6 times more than the global average of $14,400. Among major global economies with populations exceeding 50 million, making it an apples-to-apples comparison, the United States stands completely alone in our wealth generation. This massive economic engine provides the fiscal ability to fund breakthrough scientific research, global defense commitments, and unmatched private philanthropy. This is a good one. This is an important note here. We're going to dive in on the global reserve standard. So when you watch the news today, there are a few hot topics that just seem to rinse and repeat. The reserve currency status of the United States is one that we see constantly. So let's hit this on the nose here. Let's put this right on the nose. There is a persistent, anxious media narrative that the US dollar is on the verge of losing its global dominance to competing currencies or alternative assets. So let's look at the cold financial realities here. According to the International Monetary Fund's latest currency composition of official foreign exchange reserves, the first quarter of 2026, the US dollar share of global foreign exchange reserves actually increased to 57.13%. Increased. So interesting here. Not quite the same narrative that we keep seeing in the news, is it? To understand why there is no legitimate competition to the good old greenback US dollar, let's examine the true requirements of a reserve currency in the world today. A true global reserve currency requires 3 pillars. 1, absolute institutional transparency. 2, a bulletproof property rights structure. And 3, massive unrestricted liquidity. You got to be able to use that currency day in and day out. So how do the currencies of other countries hold up to those requirements? Let's start with the euro. The euro holds a stable secondary position at roughly 20% of global reserves. However, the Eurozone lacks a single unified sovereign bond market. Instead, it's a fragmented collection of national debts bound by structural political vulnerabilities that prevent it from scaling to replace the dollar. I believe, Leslie, you might be able to spot check me here. I believe there's 27 different bonds that make up the Eurozone, something like that. Pretty remarkable. In short, the euro... Right. That sounds right? Okay. 27. We have one in the US. We have one. It's, in short, the Eurozone is just not built to be a reserve currency. And it's not like the euro will ever be. It's unlikely that will ever be the case. Then there's the Chinese renminbi, aka the Chinese currency that they use day in and day out. Despite a decade of efforts by Beijing to internationalize their currency, its share of global reserves sits at a meager 1.99% as of Q1 2026. So it's only held by less than 2%, or excuse me. So it's only held as 2% of a reserve currency in the whole world, less than 2%. Why? Because the Chinese financial system relies on strict capital controls and lacks an independent judiciary. There's no independence there. It's centralized. They make 100% of the decisions. Foreign central banks and private investors are not going to park trillions of dollars of wealth in an economy where capital cannot be freely withdrawn and where property rights can be altered by the Chinese Communist Party overnight. For a long period of time, we saw that the US and international investments were piling into China. We did see that for a period of time. And then suddenly, we saw these massive investors experience market shakeups like the Chinese Communist Party changing widespread policy overnight, making their investments extremely vulnerable. And then just as suddenly, the US and international investors suddenly pulled out heavily and came back to the US, where we are pro-business and we have a more open market economy with less government mandate. Here's a note here. Anytime you hear about the strength of China and the strength of their economy, whenever China relaxes their monetary controls on their citizens, capital outflows by the hundreds of billions occur almost immediately. That's an important note. Furthermore, the deep liquidity of the US Treasury market, which averages over $600 billion daily in trading volume. This is unmatched anywhere in the world. When global markets panic, capital does not flee the United States. It runs directly to the United States, just like the China example. The dollar isn't the reserve currency of the world because of standard geopolitical momentum here. It is the reserve currency of the world because it is the only asset class backed by a system that is transparent and deep enough to absorb and safeguard global wealth. Looking at other global options, where else would you send your money if you needed a safe country to invest in? The list really is the United States, and there's not really a good second place. Last month, the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund acknowledged that despite shifting trade flows and relationships stemming from U.S. imposed tariffs, the U.S. dollar continues to be the anchor for international trade, banking, and central reserves. So with all the spicy news headlines about the U.S. losing reserve currency status, the exact opposite is actually true. And when debates over the stability of the U.S. economy come up, I would urge you to think, where else is more stable or trusted than the US on the global stage? Now, I really enjoy this one. We're trying to turn a lot of things on their head, a lot of things that we don't normally see or normally understand. Barry, I appreciate that. I think we need a little more positive, acknowledgement of the US's contributions, whether it's TED Talk or something else. We need to make sure that this information gets out there. Barry, I know you're going to like this one. So let's take a minute and let's talk about the often overlooked area that the US actually excels at: philanthropy. There's this negative idea about the US that because we're capitalists, that we're greedy and we're selfish. I mean, even Gordon Gekko had that famous 80s movie line, greed is good, right? But funny enough, the data actually shows the complete opposite. So let's take a minute and crush the stigma once and for all that Americans are heartless and selfish. When we talk about American exceptionalism, we typically talk about corporate innovation, economic achievements, military strength. But our approach to charity illustrates a human element that runs deep in the US. Historically, the US has consistently ranked at or near the very top of the Charity Aid Foundation World Giving Index. This has been driven by an exceptional cultural standard where more than 60% of citizens in the United States regularly help strangers or donate money. This is a staggering number and one that we should be extremely proud of as a country. Most countries bundle up social services by funding them with taxes and have much less philanthropy at the end of the day. In the US, we have managed to privatize philanthropy with huge numbers donated every single year. What makes us truly unique is the raw volume of philanthropy. Americans routinely donate over $500 billion annually to charitable causes. To put that in perspective, American private philanthropy alone exceeds the entire annual GDP of entire nations, places like Austria, Norway, United Arab Emirates. Support for charitable giving is designed into our legal and economic framework. The U.S. tax code pioneered the charitable tax deduction under the Revenue Act of 1917. While many European nations rely heavily on high centralized tax regimes where the state assumes total responsibility for social welfare, the American model intentionally decentralizes this power. By offering substantial tax write-offs for charitable contributions, the tax code heavily incentivizes private citizens and corporations to directly allocate their wealth to civic organizations, universities, and medical research. While recent shifts in standard deduction thresholds have altered how individual citizens file, the underlying structural incentive remains a cornerstone of American asset management. So, as we mark our 250th year here in the United States, the dominant fear is one of concern over intense political polarization. We look at our news cycle and we feel as though the nation is splintering beyond repair. Every day we hear about how the other side is terrible, and thank goodness we're not dumb enough to be a member of that other party, whatever that is. But history offers a highly reassuring perspective when we drill down. The American experiment has never been calm. It has never been a unified affair, ever. Our nation was birthed and on the back of fierce political division. If we look back to the founding era of the 1790s, the partisan hostility between Alexander Hamilton's Federalists and Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republicans was arguably more venomous than anything that we see in politics today. Politicians regularly accuse their opponents of being foreign agents and traitors, something we might see in the news here and there, even today. Newspapers openly printed slanders against even George Washington. How dare they, right? I almost wore my George Washington wig today, just for fun. How can they slander the first president and one of the greatest presidents of all time? But they did. That's what the climate was. Less than 100 years later, the country's survival was only achieved through a catastrophic civil war. The period leading up to and including the American Civil War remains the singular instance where the constitutional framework failed to calm national division peacefully. Unlike modern political policy disagreements, the Civil War was an unresolvable moral, economic, and institutional conflict over things like slavery, state sovereignty, and economic dominance between agrarian states and industrial free states. The 1850s witnessed the total collapse of the national political party system, aka the destruction of the Whig Party. This included physical violence in the halls of Congress, such as the 1856 beating of Senator Charles Sumner and the nullification of federal law through the Dred Scott decision in 1857. The resulting conflict cost an estimated 620,000 to 750,000 military lives. At that time, that was roughly 2% of the entire American population. That today is equivalent to over 7 million lives in today's numbers. Later conflicts like the fight for civil rights and dissension over the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War did not bring the country close to another civil war. The movement shattered decades-long coalition politics. The passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 triggered a profound multi-decade realignment of American political parties. This transformed the American South from a solidly Democratic bloc into a Republican stronghold. Civil strife and violence. This era was marked by severe civic unrest, state-sanctioned violence against peaceful protesters, political assassinations. We got Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, etc. There were also widespread urban riots. Dozens of American cities saw these riots throughout the late 1960s. However, this struggle ultimately demonstrated the elasticity and strength of the federal constitutional structure. Through persistent civic activism, independent judicial intervention, and federal legislative action, the Republic expanded individual rights and dismantled state-level discrimination. What we can say is this: our system will likely always have political tensions that rise and fall. That's part of what we have to deal with. But one of the strengths of a democratic system like the US is that our system can bend significantly without breaking. This is not the case in countries with monarchies and dictatorships. Think of China's history, long history of this not being the case. Think of the history of kings in Europe. Think of the history of communism throughout the world. When there is a sole leader or there's power in a small number of hands, these systems cannot bend without breaking. Instead, the regimes fall and the whole system resets. In the US, on the other hand, when our system starts to bend, it doesn't break because our political system self-corrects by electing leaders that realign the system to the needs of the people. Political polarization is not a breakdown of democracy. I want to make that clear here. Our Constitution was engineered specifically to absorb, to channel, and to survive intense civic issues throughout legislative and legal processes. The friction we experience today is not a sign of our system's impending doom, but rather another chapter in the hard-fought, continuous negotiation of human liberty in the United States. America's record of democracy remains rock solid. Never once in our 250 years have we failed to conduct scheduled federal elections, even during the Civil War and pandemics. The U.S. government is messy. The U.S. government is imperfect, and really it always has been, if we're being honest. But as long as the U.S. citizens maintain faith in the principles set down by our founding fathers, we will always have the capacity for self-improvement and to self-correct our government. And with that idea in mind, one of the questions that we get asked consistently, regularly, in this time of a lot of political tension, one thing that we get asked is, with all the political back and forth, what is the safest investment to make to avoid political changes? I'll say this, shooting straight. The best investment for you really depends on what you're looking for in an investment. Check those boxes first. But if what you're looking for is stability, it's long-term strategy, it's consistent returns, and you're trying to be safe from political back and forth, I would tell you to consider that real estate today is one of the most consistently performing assets of every decade in recent memory. And right now in real estate, I don't see any investment asset with more support from Congress on both sides of the aisle than the housing market. Both parties are actively supporting the housing market with bipartisan legislation, something extremely rare today. And I see the single-family home market as a shining star for the next decade plus. Our goal at Saint is to help you guys build what we like to call an all-weather portfolio. The goal here is simple: a portfolio that can weather the storms of the economy, of politics, and of anything else unforeseen in the future. The best combination that we consistently see investors have a lot of success with is the combination of growth investments, things like stocks, real estate, etc., along with fixed income returns, things that you can see a consistent track record into the future with. So Saint, just to put us on the map here and show you where we plug in. We plug into the fixed income side of your portfolio by lending on real estate assets that have safe collateral and a solid track record expected into the future here. So let's say you're looking at something for your portfolio like an income fund. If you're going to drill down one more layer, I'll share with you what our data and what our research shows. That if you're looking at something long-term, 10, 20, 30 years into the future, something with a long future track record where the data is extremely positive, the number one asset class that we are seeing in the market today are single family mortgages. Why? Well, there's two trends that are constantly brought up and that really actually have some legs to them. One is rate fluctuations. We cover this on many webinars. We just went over many things with the Federal Reserve, what the rate expectations were. Hint, hint, it looks like rates are going up over the next period of time, what the impact of the new Federal Reserve chair will be, et cetera. So we're looking at rate fluctuations and we're looking at inflation, which is something that has been sticky, to say the least, in the US economy. So we get this question regularly too, so we wanted to cover it here. What if rates go up? What happens to mortgage investing into single family homes and mortgages if rates go up? Well, we're comfortable in that position because if that, in that case where rates go up, and they're likely to over the next few years, especially if you look at the Federal Reserve notes, it looks like mortgages will be more stable. That's consistently what we see, because there's less refinances on the back end. People are less likely to sell their home and buy a new home if they know that their next home is going to have a much higher rate. So on a portfolio level, we see that cash flow is much more stabilized. There's less turnover on those assets at the end of the day. And we're not looking at this, we're not expecting this in the market, but we do get this question. What happens if rates go down? In the event that rates go down, we're happy with that. We buy mortgages at a discount. We buy extremely conservatively. And in the market environment where rates go down, it stimulates buying, right? People want to buy more because their rate will go down over time. It stimulates refinances. It stimulates investment, and it also boosts property values. So the underlying collateral is even stronger. And net on our side, it boosts returns. We turn over the portfolio more and we see higher returns at the end of the day. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing and how we're investing and what our investment thesis is on the Saint Income Fund, I encourage you guys to get with Tom and get some time to compare notes of what your portfolio goals are and what we can offer on the Saint Income Fund side.